Thank you for having me, and always happy to do something like a breathing exercise because, as we're talking about energy, it's a good way to refocus, and especially with ADHD stuff going, we need that transition to the what we're doing now. And so doing that kind of thing is always so useful for being like, okay, how am I going to get focused on what I'm doing? Because so much of the time we like, oh, I'm just going to go to the next thing, and we don't uh, do any of that, transition. And then we're like, I don't know why I can't focus. I'm still thinking about this last thing. No time spent on transitioning. So uh, with energy management, the reason I started exploring energy management is because when I started doing a lot more to work on managing my ADHD, I found that I got very good at writing things down in a calendar. Did not have as much luck following through on what I put in that calendar. Not because I didn't know that it was there or anything, but just because it would come up and I'd be like, I don't have the energy to do this right now. And so my first assumption was, oh, hey, I'm just putting too much on my calendar. And that was true. I was absolutely trying to do too much, but I was also not managing my energy along with my time so that when I wanted to do things that I would be at peak energy to really knock them out of the park. And this was really important with that I have kids now. And so when I work, I need to be getting my work done because I don't have all that extra time that I used to have. So energy management is this idea of working when we have energy and scheduling downtime for when we need to recover. So that's the basic start of why we would want to do energy management. But there's a whole lot of how and ways that a lot of the stuff that I look at is how do I even increase my energy levels? Because we do a lot of stuff and we want to, there's not just using the energy they have, but how we could do better.
Well, what's interesting and embedded in what you're saying is some level of experience of running out of gas or being at okay, I thought I'd have ergs or
Mm.
energy for this thing, or I liked your talking about having kids because they need dinner exactly when they need dinner.
Mhm.
And you can't make them wait till 8 p.m. You just nothing. There is a schedule around caretaking, around kid caretaking, and it's not floating. I mean, as an adult, maybe you could wait and, oh yes, we're going to eat in European style and have a
Mm.
late dinner and then some other thing later. But real world starts to tell us that we need to do some things at certain times, and also real world experience tells us when we have energy, what our ebb and flow is. I know you were going to talk about some bodily rhythms. I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah. So we basically have two timing rhythms to our energy flows. We're starting with the one that most people have heard of, our circadian rhythm, which is our like wake sleep cycle. That it's incredibly important for maintaining energy is to be going to bed at a certain time so that when we wake up, we're waking up with that energy cycle. But then we also have this lesser known one called our ultradian cycle, which are these 90-minute cycles that go on throughout the day. And they this is they're very interesting because they also match up with our sleep patterns, where we're going into REM sleep and deep sleep in these sections of 90 minutes that are related to these ultradian rhythm. But the idea with the ultradian rhythm is that we're going to have energy that goes up and down throughout the day. We're not going to go, it's not just this one big peak and then one big trough. Although you'll have a big higher peaks at certain points in your circadian rhythm and ultradian rhythm match up. And the same thing happens when you kind of have that trough. So a lot of people will have a circadian and an ultradian, like after lunch, early afternoon. things are starting to wind down, you're feeling a little bit tired. I know, like, sometimes 3 or 4 o'clock, I'll just be like, I can't get off the couch now. And part of that is just that's naturally where my body comes in at a lower energy cycle. It has less to do with how I'm, what I've done during the day, and just that, hey, this is going to have lower energy.
But knowing that, right? So you can kind of plan around that. I know we sort of started this conversation around using the calendar, and the calendar kind of, it's this empty page, and you think, oh, blue sky, right? Anything, any time of day, whenever that other person wants to meet. But there's this, where I hear you coming from, is understanding, hey, it doesn't matter what I did earlier in the day. There is a certain energy hole at this time. It just is that way for me. And I don't want to put anything there. I need some couch time, for example.
Yeah. And just to answer a question from the chat real quickly, it's ultradian, like the word ultra. So ULTRIAN, I believe.
I am going to put it in the chat because
It's a funny looking word. But yeah, so it's one of the great things that we did starting the session was asking people, hey, where's your energy level at? And that's an important question to ask yourself throughout the day, because you can kind of be like, okay, if I can kind of look through where I'm going to have energy throughout the day, then I can go, okay, how do I match that up with a calendar so that I'm not scheduling things when it's just the worst time imaginable? Because I've definitely, as I got better at scheduling, I started realizing, okay, with the podcast, I want to interview people when I'm at my best, because I need to bring energy to the show. And that means actually having energy. So using my like calendar tools, I can just be like, okay, here's the only hours that I'm willing to schedule these interviews. And that makes it so much better, because then for one, I'm scheduling on when I want to. And then it makes it so that when it does happen, I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I don't have to be doing all this other stuff to try and get into my mental space to be ready to have this interview.
So in my home, we use the slang, bring in our A game. So if we're going to bring our A game, we're helping somebody with something, right? We don't want to show up where the night before we overdid it and we can't think straight. But when we're coming with our A game, that's how I hear you want to do the interviews, with your best self, the best energy, the most attentive to what they're saying. Ability to both look at this chat and them. Yeah. So this is about being the best you, and knowing when is the best time for certain activities. I really like that.
Yeah. But then with that in mind, if we have an idea of when these cycles are, I know 5 p.m. it's 5 for me right now when we started this. That's not the highest level of my energy. But because of that, I can do preventative things during the day so that I don't come into this at the lowest energy thing. So like before, at like 4, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to have a snack. Most times before an interview, I'll go for a walk, but because it's 90 out right now, I was like, I don't want to go do that. And doing that kind of stuff, then I can come into this and be ready to go. Or as you had your cappuccino, like that's another thing people can do to, hey, I just need a little bit more to make sure I'm ready for this, rather than being, and it's the nice part about it is it makes you more proactive about these energy troughs rather than reactive, where you're like, I have a lot more, it's a lot harder for me to actually reactively give myself energy than it is to proactively give myself energy, because there's this idea that energy follows energy, where if I So as I said, I like to go on walks before my things because getting that movement in, my body then is creating energy and then energy follows from that.
But this thing that I think I heard you say, please correct me, is creating energy, doing a task that energizes before you need the energy. There's some place where it's easier to preserve energy than to build it from scratch.
Yeah.
Am I hearing you right? And the other way I hear that is, if there wasn't any energy over here, I could drink all the coffee I wanted. And you can't make it be there if there isn't anything in there.
Yeah. It's like when I am stuck on the couch, I have that inertia to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I have the movement, I have the inertia to keep moving. Now, I do want to caveat this with the idea that we cannot have max energy all day long. You can try, but you are going to crash
Well, it's
eventually.
unsustainable. It's not
Yeah.
sustainable. Right.
Yeah. So I like to try and use that movement of the trough to be like, okay, if I'm not going into something where I need that energy, I'm going down, I'm going to take a break now. I'm going to relax, then coming out of it, then use that for a walk or something to then re-energize.
We do have a question, and it might be early because we still have more of this journey around energy management. But the question is how to handle energy management, factoring in reasonable time estimation of tasks. So, all right, I'm going to have a meeting and the meeting's going to run 1 hour, right? That's in my mind. The other person is thinking maybe we have 2 hours, right? So this estimating time and as that tasks take, as well as noticing what we have here. There's like a lot of moving parts that this question is talking about. So sometimes we try to push ourselves to meet a deadline, although we notice our energy levels are dipping. How do you plan accordingly? So this is a beautiful question. How do we plan accordingly? How much ergs does this task take? How much time is really available?
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts.
This is something I like to do a lot in my to-do list when I'm using them, is to write in if I think a task is going to be energizing or draining or neutral. So that, because if I'm doing a draining task, it is going to take me longer to do this than a energizing task will. And of course, we're never going to get this all right because there's all sorts of other factors that we're not accounting for. Like if I had gone out and done work in my yard today, it would have been way more draining than a normal day. So
yeah, well, there's the heat, right? The heat is a factor, right? Yeah, among other things.
Yeah, so there's all these other factors. So it's very, plan accordingly is always, I like see that and I'm like, I wish I could do it so much better because it's hard. And it's, what I can say there is to err on the side of giving ourselves forgiveness when this happens, because it's going to happen where we're like, oh, I thought this was going to take, an hour, but it's going to take 2 now because I just don't have the energy to get through this. What I'm seeing in this is this idea of, hey, we're going to have this deadline. Maybe I can push into hyper focus and really just knock it out. And I'm not a huge fan of hyper focus because it's kind of a double-edged sword where you're going to get that work done, but you are borrowing from your future self at a very high interest rate. It is not 1-to-1. You are going, like, when I do a big hyper focused task, I'm like, I'm going to be out for a day or 2 afterwards. I'm going to be, and so
that cost of that super energy, of the digging deep energy, and that's another one of these things is, do you know what the cost is, right? Do you sound like you do know what the cost is. If I muscle this today, I am costing the work from tomorrow. Okay, so don't plan anything for tomorrow, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
But not everybody understands the cost. We're in the moment. All right, this is due, so I'm going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's even when I feel that kind of urge to just like push through and go into hyper focus is like having some external thing to help me go and take a break. One of the ways I do that is drinking a lot of water. Water helps with the energy, but you also have to stop and go to the bathroom enough. And it's like getting up from what I'm doing can like break that hyper focus. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to stop, take a break now. Of course, it's usually like, okay, now I really need to go. It's not like, oh, I've just noticed.
You're singing to the choir there. I will like, oh yes, this body's telling me it needs something urgently, but it can wait. What are you kidding? I mean, if it was another person telling you how urgently they had to pee, you would say, well, go do that. But in our own minds, we will really make ourselves wait.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always also find it when we're doing those breaks too, it's really important to not do a break that you're not going to be able to like break yourself from. Like I'll be like, I remember years and years ago, I was playing a game, Civilization 5, and I was like, oh, I'll just take a 5-10 minute break, play a few turns of that. 2 days later, go, oh, what was I doing? And it was an easily repeatable mistake. I kept doing it because I was like, oh, this time will be different, and it's not going to be different. So I really like doing. I know I've said walks so many times already, but that is my like go-to break because I can just pop out in my neighborhood, or I have a little hiking path near me. Just do a quick 15 or 20-minute walk, come back, and my brain is so much more ready to write. And with two ideas there is I could either decide to listen to something like a podcast, and that can be fun, or if I don't, I can give my brain time to like percolate ideas and just wander. And that's a huge thing that we don't let ourselves do enough, is spend time thinking and letting our brain just wander and come up with ideas. And that is another form of like, oh, I have ideas now, I'm excited. I spend so much time distracting myself from being able to think that when I do give myself the chance to think, it's energizing.
Yeah, my husband's got a top 5 strengths is ideation. And, he likes to say sometimes nobody needs a new idea. They just want you to take the trash out. But when he's had time to spend with people where it's that blue sky brainstorming, he's energized after that. There's a lot of pleasure and energy derived from doing that thing that we're drawn to, right? The interest based.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I see a couple of things that look juicy for us. One is this time will be different is a huge red flag when I hear myself saying it. Thank you for putting that in there. And then this one about using a time timer, taking a break, drinking water, maybe a bio break, that we could use an external prompt to help us take these breaks. And some of the other things, like with eye fatigue, they say 20 minutes, every 20 minutes you want to take a few minutes to focus on a further point. So how are we going to know 20 minutes passed unless we have an external prompt? For sure. There was another question around how do we think this energy management works with or not with medication?
Yeah. So medication is, I'll start off. I am very pro medication for treating ADHD. I see it as one of the most effective ways to do things because it works. Like it's just like all the studies I've seen is like, yes, do it. And so then medication works really well with it because it can help level out that focus so that we're not dipping into those troughs, and that when we need to focus on things, specifically like our proprioception things, being like, I will amend this. It can help us focus on things, but it can hurt our proprioception in that a lot of people have, issues with, they don't realize they're hungry.
Go back a step and define proprioception,
Uh,
please.
yes, I should, because I should have said interoception, because
Okay, both of those. I'm fascinated, but what does that word mean?
I'm I'm being too smart for my own good.
No.
It's no, it's no, I mean, it's using the wrong words. I'm like, I'm using a big word. But interoception is our sense of self. And so like what we noticing things about what's going on in our body. And
Okay.
sometime
So
with
that is
medication,
like the hungry, or gotta pee, or my tummy's upset, or I've got a tickle in my ear.
yeah,
It's this thing sensing what's happening with this
yeah.
your
And so
person.
medication can affect that for certain things. Like I know Adderall definitely, and a lot of stimulants have a appetite reduction effect, and that does not equal you need to eat less food. It just means you're not as hungry. And so then we can get that, 3 p.m. hangry. I haven't eaten, I'm grumpy, and that's not a good place to be at. But then at the same time, you can go, okay, I'm going, like, I schedule when I eat my lunch. I will forget to do it. This does not have to do with stimulant medication. I will just forget to do it. This happened for years before I went on medication. I was like, lunch, I'll eat when I'm hungry. Oh, I'm hungry 4 hours ago.
I have to say the best workplaces for me have been ones where there's a cafeteria, or there's a culture of stopping for lunch and eating together, and then I will eat lunch.
Yeah.
But if left to my own devices, I'm not terribly good about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that follows, and we want to then like be scheduling those things like, okay, I'm going to have snacks ready, have snacks ready, schedule times that I'm going to eat, make sure that we have things like water available so that we're drinking throughout the day. And because the medication can reduce our ability to remember to do that kind of stuff, but our cues to do the stuff, but it can help with remembering to do it when we create other external cues.
So this is really interesting. I mean, to me, the interoception, is that how you pronounce it? I've seen it written, but I'm not very good at saying it out loud. So, I mean, showing my water is no small task. I have for the last 20 or so years had on and off bad heartburn. And so I have made it a habit to go straight to water after coffee number one in the day. And that has been terrifically helpful with this heartburn solution. But noticing, and then just making a habit of having the water there so I don't have to stop what I'm doing to go get water, because I'm still pretty good at ignoring whatever's happening in my person. I have a question in the chat I'd like to address, and then there's another question, two things, but I want to give you the last word on that, because I love that you were talking about water and how much it does for us.
Yeah. So water is just one of those must-haves for everybody. Like, it is the basis of life kind of thing. And it is so easy to just not drink water throughout the day because it's not available. And the amount of extra focus you get when you're hydrated is so stark from when you're this is something that I definitely have to work with my daughter a lot, where she does not notice that she's getting thirsty, especially hot days like today. And we're like, okay, come and drink. And, you know, doing things like, okay, we're going to have Gatorade today so that, you know, it's a little bit more fun and you get to drink something that, you know, it's got electrolytes. But
I see
which
people dressing up their water with like a little bit of lemon or
mhm,
lime and, whatever makes it happen.
yeah, because for some people, water is too boring. I do not have that problem. I just keep going. But you know, for some people, they like the more bubbly water or any of those things. It's as long as you're getting more drink in you, it's good. And also, there is a myth that caffeine will dehydrate you. So drinking a cup of coffee would dehydrate you more than it would hydrate you. There's not enough caffeine in anything that we would drink to cause that effect. So
This is the other thing I love about this community is people are interested and they will have researched something and they're kind of an armchair expert, but I don't have to research it. I've seen enough of your content that I know that if you're saying it, you looked it up, you know it. So thank you for sharing that. That is a really juicy tidbit. There was a question in the Q&A tool about how do you determine the pattern of high and low energy? Like, how do you learn what your ebb and flow is? And then there's been some discussion about it in the chat, but I wanted to just hand it straight back to you from that place, from the
yeah,
beginning of the question place.
there are a couple ways you can do it. The easiest is just um, creating some sort of reminder to like hourly just write down what your energy level is at that time of the day and doing that for like a week. Now, I will say I understand that is a difficult proposition. Like writing something down every hour for a week, that's it's a lot of work. And with ADHD, it is not easy. Uh,
But that said, once we're curious about a thing, we could really want to know, like there's in the chat, the place where the person where this question originated is saying, yeah, I decided I would check every 30 minutes in with myself and make a graph to see where I
yeah.
was. So, I mean, power to you. This is the thing about curiosity is if we can start to be collecting data to learn about ourselves, something we can
Mhm.
look at later. It's not just how we felt today. We can look at it 3 days later. So helpful because we're the awareness and then the reflecting with the knowledge, that metacognition. Oh, it's a little bit of a challenge, right?
Yeah. And it's important we're doing it too to make it very simple to do. Like, just like, yeah, I'm gonna do like 1 to 5. And also then, you know, kind of comparing it to your calendar too. So you know, hey, what was I doing on those days that would have drained me or energized me to create outliers. Uh, and then there's also some apps I think that can help you track this kind of thing. I had a sleep app a while ago called, I think it was called Rise, that tracked my circadian rhythm, and then gave me a little bit of this is how it should look throughout the day. And given that this is a rough estimate of how it should look versus what really is, because we all have our own little quirks of how our body is going to look at things. Because so earlier I said ultradian rhythm is 90 minutes. That's an average. That's not a set in stone. This is what everybody does. So it's finding your own little rhythms are going to be much more important. Even while apps can help, they're not going to be precise.
It's very interesting that you say that. So their app is this external, right? That's got some things going
Mhm.
for it, but we're all unique. The way, a rhythm on average for people could be one thing right? We know like the height average for women, right? I'm 5. So there is the average height for women. I'm not that. I'm not exactly an outlier, but I'm pretty short. So that's the thing with these things about these rhythms is there's the average and then there's you, what is your unique, right? 5 foot.
Yeah.
So helpful. So I thought I saw, Rick, that you had a comment or a question.
Yeah, it was a little bit ago, but what you just said kind of sparked that all over again for me. We're not there. There's a bell curve, right? And we're on it somewhere. And so when you read something in a book that says, do it this way, we don't know if we're on the left or right side of that bell curve or anywhere near it. So, but I was thinking in terms of it being difficult to keep a log, which I have found to be one of my best self-awareness tools. We got to keep it really simple. I just put on the side of my calendar during the day. I set a little timer for 30 minutes, actually 25. It goes off. I say, I did this in the last 25 minutes and I feel like this, and I'm done, right? So keep it incredibly simple. And what I find is it's really enlightening when I look back and say, geez, every day between 7 and 11, I get a lot of stuff done. Between 2 and 5, I might as well just go to the movies. So that's just a waste of time. I might as well just go enjoy myself somewhere. So I get to know what my patterns are, not just what the bell curve says my type should be. But I think the crucial thing there is to keep it really, really simple. And if anybody's going for a diagnosis, I think a log like that can really help your psychiatrist. You just go and say, here's what's going on with me. Here's my subjective opinion, and here's some objective data for you to look at too. I love logs. They're great.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something I like to nerd out about and be like, oh, I can make a spreadsheet with this, and then I can like see the numbers, and then I'll do it for like a week, and then I'll be like, something will happen. I'm like, I completely forgot it existed.
Yeah. I can do spreadsheets on some things, but for the log, it's always just really simple. And I don't think I've ever done one for more than a week. I just do it for a short time to identify a pattern. And then I can say, oh, once I'm aware of the pattern, maybe I can, you can't change what you're oblivious to. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I love logs. Easy, brief ones.
Yeah. All right. I also see another question in here that I love because it's asking what to do during breaks between your cycles. And it's hard because, yeah, I like to go for walks, but that's not always an option. And trying to figure out what you want to do during those times can be tricky because you don't want to do something that's going to pull you away for too long. For a while, I did Sudoku puzzles. Those were fun. Any kind of puzzle is great. I like to play with Legos sometimes because they're great little mind things. Like, I'm going to put this together. It's going to be fun. I do like to be active when I can, although I know that's not an option for everyone because that's just, like people have other limitations in their life. But if you can be active, if you're not doing a walk or run, you could do some push-ups or some sit-ups or look on YouTube for chair exercise where you're just sitting in the chair and doing arm movements, or yoga.
I like a little jazzy music,
Yeah.
I like some bubblegum punk. That's my
Yeah. One of the things I did before starting here, I sat down, I popped on some music that I knew would get me in the right headspace, because it's like, okay, that's going to get me going again. Yet dancing is a great option. One of the things I do in another community is occasionally do these Pomodoro dance parties. So Pomodoros are those like 25-minute working cycles, and then you take a 5-minute break. Although those times are kind of arbitrary. But so what we would do with the Pomodoro dance party, we'd all jump on Zoom together. We'd do 25 minutes of work. Then we'd pop on music for 5 minutes and dance, and then go back to work after the 5 minutes. And it was so incredibly effective at getting me to like process all my emails and doing it's good for, I find, small individual tasks, kind of things that are not gonna that are okay to interrupt when I have my dance party, and then I can get back to something else. So I do like emails or go through bills or that kind of thing. And having that movement in between tasks really helped keep the energy up while I was doing all that stuff that would normally be like, okay, let's take a nap in between.
So somebody put this really nice resource in the chat, Daniel Pink's Are You a Lark and Owl? Third bird. And this is another thing around energy management. And it sort of feels like, but I'm not going to summarize it because I'm not that familiar, but in my house, my husband is an early morning person, and I, 4 o'clock in the afternoon is when I am RTG. Now I'm this is my zone time that I'm really have some energy. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then I wanted to point something out that's not around energy management or Will's talk, which is when you're looking in the chat and you've asked something and other people answer where they're from, where they're coming from for this question, or they're helpful to people in the room. Oh, I can't remember that thing. That's how I know I'm in the right place with people like me who are helpful and thoughtful. And that's one of the things I like a lot about Renify, and is how I know I'm in the right place at Renify, is that people are nice, they're thoughtful, they share, they're considerate. So just was pointing that out. But I don't want to take away from where we're at. Thank you so much for sharing that resource. There is a way to save the chat if you're on a computer. When you're in the chat, you can look near the place where you type in the words for the 3 dots, click on it, and it'll have a saved chat. If you are not able to save it, like you're on a phone and you're a Renify member, if you send me a note there, I will share the chat with you because I always save it. And hopefully that answers that question. We had another thing that was a little earlier in the chat around flow and deep work. Flow state and deep works. How does you coordinate flow state and energy management? Is there a way to correlate those?
Yeah, so flow is tricky with ADHD because it's so close to hyperfocus. And I don't know if I'd completely separate them from what I've read. They're almost the same thing, but with deep work that we get from Cal Newport, who I've read a lot of Newport stuff, and it relates very well to energy management because you want to do your deep work when you're in good energy state. So as I was saying earlier about Pomodoros, I find them good for shorter things. I will do my writing in much longer bouts of like 70 to 90 minutes, which means I do need to take a break right at the end. But having a longer thing, taking a break, and then doing another longer thing can work very well to keep you in that deep work mindset. You're not, because the big thing about deep work is removing the distractions, taking away things like, for this, I had to, put my phone on do not disturb. I don't have any other notifications coming up so that I am focused on this. And the same thing works for going into deep work and be like, okay, this is what I'm doing for right now. I'm going to focus on this. I can even take a break where maybe I'm physically doing something else, but my brain is still percolating on these ideas. And that can work very well. And along with that, just because mentioning Cal Newport stuff reminds me of his shutdown routine at the end of the day is to be like, I'm going to have a cutoff point where I stop working and doing do all the stuff to make sure I'm done for the day, and then have a phrase like shutdown complete, so that, hey, after this, I'm not doing work anymore. And that's stopping work and having a time where you stop work is just as important as having a time when you start work.
as any person who's made dinner and is waiting for you at home can tell you.
I mean, I remember years ago when I'd be doing writing at 11 o'clock at night and being like, I know I'm going to get up in 7 hours. That was not, I was like, looking back, I'm like, how did I finish anything? Like, just running off of anxiety and caffeine.
So true. All right. I'm going to bring us back to being a little on track. I know we've been talking a lot about the calendar, our energy, some tracking to understand our own flow. We talked about things this body needs: water, food, about some, our own issues with remembering to remember, right? Remembering to eat.
Yeah.
But I know when I had listened to some of your podcasts around energy that you had some distinctions around energy, which I thought were so fascinating and insightful, that there wasn't just energy, it had flavors, it had
Yeah.
some underneath it parts. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So a big part of thinking about energy is realizing that it's not just physical energy, because that's the easiest place to go to. It's like, I'm tired, but we also have, okay, but why are we tired? Because we have our mental energy, where we've all had this experience where we're like, yeah, I'm physically like, I could go do stuff, but my brain can't do anything. I've got brain fog and I'm kind of like just staring. This is I feel like the afternoon lull is a lot more brain fog then, where I'm like, you could go tell me to go, run a mile, and I'd be like, okay, but my brain it would take like halfway there, I'd be like, oh, there's the brain. And then along with mental energy, we also have our emotional energy, which is just so key to doing things. This weekend, I blocked all social media from my phone because I was not doing well reading all the hot takes about recent news. Hey, guess what? It doesn't matter what time you listen to this. Hot takes about recent news are going to be happening. I just listened to one of the episodes before about this, and I had also said the same thing. And I'm like, I don't even know it was in the news then. So,
but that thing about protecting ourselves from the news isn't going anywhere. What do I need to do today? Am I going to get so emotionally exhausted from reading news, right?
mhm.
Putting some boundaries on when do I consume news, or when am I looking at social media. I applauded for you turning it off for yourself, because I'm a caretaker for my mom. So on the one hand, you think, oh yeah, email any time of the night or day, but I can't have disturbances. I'm only going to do email during daylight. I've got a parameter for about when I'm going to reply. And I think that we get caught up in thinking we have to know what's happening every minute, but is it really going to change if you don't learn it until tomorrow? And if you decide you don't want to have that color your whole day until, let's say, tomorrow after lunch, is it really going to change anything? So understanding when does it work for you to consume media or to write emails, and to get where your ergs are and how to manage them. So I love this thing about the emotional and the news and the social media, and taking care of our emotions that way.
Yeah. And I mean, and it applies just as much to dealing with other people who, like, going road rage is a huge thing, and like I've had times driving home and, someone did something, and then I'm like, the rest of the day, I'm thinking about that guy that, flicked me off as I drove by. I'm like, I didn't do anything though. Why did he feel like that? And I'm like, he has hijacked my emotions for the day and he doesn't even care. Uh, like he does not remember me. And
But
so
that's so true. I mean, that was just a moment in passing, and it cut you right to the quick, right? But right, how do we put that back into a box so we can move along with our day? It's tough.
yeah. So so far we've had 3 kinds of the energy. That I got 4 that I talk about. So we
Okay,
got
sorry.
physical.
Physical.
I just trying to remember so I don't forget to, because I was like, oh, we've been talking about emotional. I forgot where's one more. So we got physical, mental, emotional, and then we have what I call spiritual. And I don't want to draw people off because of how they hear this, because it's more of like the idea of the using the human spirit to do something. So one of the ways I think about it is I'm in the gym and I'm got to lift something heavy, like I'm doing the bench press, I'm pushing, and my spotter's like, push, and then I push, and I'm like, why did they saying the word push make me actually get more strength there? I mean, it didn't, but I was able to draw into something in me that then I pushed harder. And so there's something more to energy than just like what we could see on the surface of how it should work. And this is also like, can also think of this in terms of like hyperfocus. How are we getting all that energy to focus? Well, we're borrowing it from the future in that case. But then we also have things like doing things that we're interested in, doing what we're called to do can give us so much more energy than just being like, I'm filling out this form again. And no one's going to read it. That's draining and soul crushing. So that's how I kind of view spiritual energy is it's the undefinable of the rest of it because it exists in how it pushes us to do things or not do things.
I really liked your way of talking about it around exercise. And there's something about another human believing in us, right? You can do it. Push, right? They're rooting for us. Where did that come from? I mean, we could say, oh, I dug deeper because of, but there's some synergy. It's not necessarily definable. And I like that about it because we get to be this very, it has to be rocks are hard, water's wet. It has to be known and definable. And sometimes there is this seems to work when we're doing it together better. What do I really need to know exactly why? Is it just enough to know that it works better?
Yeah. I mean, I know so many people that love doing exercise classes because they'll do them and they'll work harder the entire time. And it's that social aspect. And so I think that's very much in line with the spiritual side of energy.
I love that you go there. I do. We have a question in the chat and then it's got a follow-up. So I'm going to just do one and then do the other, which is, do you have thoughts on boundaries and energy management? We're kind of around the edges of the boundaries, but
Yeah, boundaries are important because this is something I've been meaning to write about for a long time because boundaries are so important and so hard because it feels like boundaries are about the other person, but really boundaries are about you. It's about what you're willing to accept. And, being like, okay, if, no one can violate your boundaries except for yourself because, well, relatively speaking, because the idea there being that you say, if you have, go with your mother-in-law, says something to your kids that you don't agree with, they're not breaking your boundary if you tell them the boundary and then they still do it and then there's no consequences. That's you breaking your boundary and just letting it happen. So boundaries in this case would be, hey, I need to enforce consequences when someone is doing something that I don't think is appropriate. or that I don't want to experience. And so I think in terms of energy management, we're asking here, how do I create these boundaries when I'm tired and people ask me to do things? That's hard. Like saying like, uh, I know saying no is hard. So my biggest tactic is to put distance between me and having to answer. So my go-to is always like, I'll have to check my calendar. I know my calendar is incredibly flexible and I could probably do it. But if I can say that, I can be like, nope, I'm not going to be able to swing that. I got that so busy week, or, got to do something. And then just, work, or as another great ADHD advocate, Renee Brooks says, is guard your yes. Don't just give it away. Guard it, because it's so important to keep it.
I've been in many a meeting where I don't usually call uncle. I usually don't call uncle, but when I call uncle and then and I'll say I have exactly enough energy to schedule a follow-up meeting and that's it. And but we didn't finish covering this agenda. Like, well, one more thing, that's where I feel like there's a boundary. When you know yourself and you go, all right, we got 5 and the other person's not listening to well, you've never said that before. So maybe it's not real, but to say for real, I have 5 more minutes on this task with you. And we could use it scheduling the next meeting so that we're going to continue moving forward or however you want to use it. But that's my suggestion.
Yeah. This is also reminding me of my brother, who would, my mom had this habit of like, when we're on the phone, we'd be like, okay, we got to go. And then she would like well, I got one more thing to tell you. And it'd go on and on. And my brother just hung up the phone. That was just his go-to. He's like, I'm done talking, and hang up. He's just like, you're like, oh, he's just done. I'm like, that is an incredibly effective boundary. He said, I'm done talking. I hung up the phone. They can't talk to me anymore.
We have to find more socially acceptable ways, though, of managing things. But that was, you said, the limit was reached, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've hit it with him too, and it's been like, but okay, I guess we're done.
So there was a follow-up, which I think is kind of juicy. Also, how do we manage energy in scenarios of rejection and bring us back on track? So like you're in a job interview maybe, or there's say an interview or job, something with rejection. So I feel I don't know if I am interpreting this correctly. So please feel free to correct us if we're not meeting you where your question is. So let's say energy management. We're moving right along, and then you say, "I never liked that blouse, Melissa. Why do you keep wearing it?" I don't know. Something that might cut me to the quick, right? Might make me have a trigger instead of just being in the moment. That's what I think I hear.
So we got I'm going to go with this idea of rejection sensitive dysphoria that is popular with ADHD. Now, I know it's not diagnostic criteria or anything, but there's enough people that, resonate with it that, hey, it's something worth looking at. And it is very hard when you have that feeling of like, I've been rejected. I feel terrible. That is our emotional energy just plummeting, and we're having problems there. So how do we come back from that feeling of why do I even try? It's very disheartening, and when you're disheartened, hard to do anything. So working on rejection sensitivity would probably be the first place to start there. I'm gonna say the name wrong because I can't quite remember. It's I can't even remember the name of the book. It's the guy that wrote about no. It's called he did a project where he like went out and got people to uh uh say no to him. So he'd asked lots of things. So it'd be, you know, he like went into someone's yard and was like, hey, can I play soccer in your yard? Kind of things where he was looking for the no. It's
Mm.
like rejection training kind of thing. I believe his name is Zhai Zhang. And I'm sure we can find it here, but that idea of kind of going out of your way to experience rejection in a sense where it's not there, the stakes are low, you know, asking, going to a coffee shop and being like, hey, could I get 15% off because it's rainy today, you know, something like that. Where they're going to be like, no, you can't just get 15% off. Or they might say yes, which is even more mind-blowing when you do try to do a lot of this rejection trading where you try and get a no and people say yes to things because you're like, oh, people do say yes to a lot of these things that I would have just assumed that would just been always a no. So that's where I'd start with rejection, is learning to kind of live with those feelings a little bit more, because we're gonna have rejection regardless. There are some medications that are effective for rejection sensitive dysphoria. I think guanfacine was one of the ones. It's also used for regularly treating ADHD. Again, just start this here. I am not a doctor. I do not a psychiatrist. These are things to take with a grain of salt there, because that's well out of my area of even close to expertise. But it's starting with dealing with the rejection is a great place to on getting through there, because when we can feel less rejection, we can bounce back from it better. And that's going to be the thing. So there's also, I think, a big piece of rejection sensitive dysphoria is that we live in it a lot of shame. We did something and it makes us a bad person. We didn't get the job, not because there was a better candidate, but because we weren't good enough. We were bad.
Mm.
And getting out of the shame hole is incredibly important for dealing with our emotions. And shame lives to be in the darkness by itself. When we can share our shames, it makes us feel so much better. I mean, it's not going to cure it. It's not a cure all. There are things that I have shared about shame. I feel that I'm like, yeah, I still feel bad about that. That was a bad thing I did. But that is then moved it into guilt there, because shame is, I am a bad person. Guilt is, I did a bad thing. So that's...
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of distinctions here, which I'm really appreciative of.
Yeah.
I feel like some of the things we talked about that help us generate energy, even like just running down to the mailbox, that some of the, like a timeout for ourselves, a little quiet moment, some way to self-calm.
Yeah, I think journaling is a great way to do that too, as long as we're not lying to ourselves in our journal, where we're saying like, I'm the worst and I'm letting my inner critic say everything here. Like, no, let's step back and really view like, okay, why didn't I get this job? Okay, it's because I didn't have this experience, I didn't have this, or it's because I sneezed in the interviewer's face on accident or something. Like, that was a bad thing I did, but I can still do something to fix this later. Like, I can come back from this and get a different job. I can.
Yeah.
Like,
but sometimes you're in a job interview and you may want the job, but it's not a good fit, right? And so they noticed it wasn't a good fit, right?
Mhm.
That still can feel like rejection. I've told this story recently. I really wanted to work at Rand because I lived not far from where the Rand people were who do research, but I never could find my way in. And it wasn't like wanted it so intensely that it was crushing me. It just was like, hey, they study things that might be interesting to me.
Mhm.
But there are things where there's disappointment, and how do we manage our disappointment?
Yeah. So managing disappointment. Yeah. So I think journaling is a great place to start. Talking to a friend, talking to a therapist, um, or coach. Big key there is talking. And so all of these things are about externalizing those internal thoughts, because we're not good at thinking things through when we don't get them out. We get into a lot of bad patterns where we're just repeating things. And so it's get it out of your head, make so that you can actually go see where you're at. Because I spend too much time in my own head being like, I've said this and I'm just going to repeat this over and over again. And then I'll like, okay, well, if I wrote this down and I'm like, I thought I had like 30 thoughts swirling in my head. I had like half a sentence when I like tried to write it down, and being like, okay, I have this half a sentence. Can I expand on that and go, oh, I was just stuck here. So that's a great place to start, with just getting the thoughts out of your head, be it through journaling, talking, whatever you need to do. Yeah, maybe you can sing your problems. you know,
Don't knock it. That sounds like a great.
yeah,
Or you can, my mother was the right time for Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive. And that, I mean, it's become an anthem since then, but I Will Survive is awesome
yeah,
to bring. A little
yeah. Just
self-soothing, right?
blast the music, sing it. You'll feel so much better, because you're like, hey, I am getting that feeling of energy, and I'm changing my state. I'm not staying where I was. I'm going to somewhere else.
Then there's like there's breathing techniques people do. I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't want to go into an arena that I don't have a lot of knowledge around, but there is a lot of people who will use like the Wim Hof breathing to change their state, their emotional state, or
Yeah,
their
doing
energy state.
yeah. The Wim Hof is great for like just raising energy, and also, yeah, any kind of breath work is really helpful for controlling your like nervous system and that kind of thing, being like, I am going to be here now.
We have this just amazingly great insight in the chat, which is we really aren't that kind to ourselves. Yeah.
No, we're not, and it's
We're not.
silly. I'll share one of my big insights that has immensely helped me with this, was driving along, driving my daughter to school, listening to the Frozen soundtrack, and hearing Elsa go, "Let it go," and then being like, thinking about my issues with perfectionism, and being like, man, I judge myself on my work, and I am a perfectionist, but perfection isn't possible. I am never going to have self-worth with this system. That's a problem. Like, even as a perfectionist, I went, oh, there is a big disconnect here. If I cannot achieve self-worth ever, I need
Yeah.
to let it go. I need
Yeah.
to. And so that became, I started a practice of non-perfectionism, which sounds silly, but doing things imperfectly and being like, yeah, and doing like things that I could do. Like, I'd be like, okay, I have light blue plates and dark blue plates. Light blue plates go here, dark blue plates go here. Now they go in the cabinet. Does not matter if they're separated. Did not like that one bit when I started, because I could, line them up properly. Or I'm going to journal. I'm going to use, this one pen. This is going to be my journaling pen. Nope. Now I have like 4 pens I can use. Doesn't matter. I can set one down and then start in the middle of another sentence with a red pen. Did not like it at first, but I can do it fine now. And doing those little acts of non-perfection has really helped my being like, oh yeah, I don't, like first started editing my podcast, there was so much editing that I had to do that was not necessarily being like, no one is going to ever hear me breathe. Why? Will?
Why? Where did that rule come from? Right?
Yeah. I mean, like and it can be a problem if you're a very loud breather, but it was like, I've listened to other podcasts. I'm like, oh yeah, I can hear them breathing and it's okay. So,
but I like how many examples you have of, I had this rule, I broke that rule. It's still okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, there's sometimes we think the story you told about the plates and the pens, well, that applies to Will, and it doesn't apply to my situation, which is X, Y, and Z, right? I wish I could have one, but I'm not really a perfectionist. But this thing where good enough, right? Is something happening? Are you making an impact with people and they're hearing you breathe? Okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can live with that.
Yeah. And then this eventually led to me, I could hire someone else to edit my podcast, because at first I couldn't. That was not on the table because I had a vision and it had to be perfectly put into place. Yes, certainly money is a factor in hiring an editor, but at the beginning it was like, okay, I can't trust someone else to do this for me. And I'm like, he actually probably does a better job than I do. So
this is really interesting. My husband's a very good intuitive photographer, but he likes every photo he ever took. Mm-hmm. I think I'm a better editor for when we compile those, and that noticing where someone else can contribute and then we can share the success in the thing. I feel like I like winning with the other people helping me. I feel like that's an even bigger win. But I really like how this journey that you're willing to share it too, because a lot of, we're here in the ADD universe, and sometimes we see, oh, that person's got it all locked up, lock, stock, and barrel. No, we're a work in progress. We're transforming in front of you. Here's how we're still transforming around this issue of perfectionism. And what was the really important thing? Was it doing all the editing yourself, or having the product be a good representation of you and out for people to consume it? Yeah. Right? You had a priority. I know we didn't quite get to priorities.
Yeah,
if we're going to, but
yeah, I bet we can jump into it real quick. So one of the biggest things for energy management is prioritizing, because the thing with you except with time management is you only have enough time to do so much stuff in a day. With energy management, you only have so much energy to do what you want in a day. And the thing I like to say is you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything. So that means
you need a t-shirt with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Not a bad idea.
That one's really a good one.
Yeah.
Can you say it one more time for us?
You can do anything you want, but you can't do everything. And this means that we need to be very, very precise with our priorities, being like, hey, I cannot do everything. I have to choose what I want to do. I have found that with this mindset being like, okay, how am I going to choose what I want to do? And the good way to start this is going, I'm going to write a list of what all the things I want to do for, like this month, for example. And I can then take the top, 3 items, 4 items, whatever it is, depending on how long the list is, and be like, I cannot do anything on this list below this item until these 4 are complete. Because we can't do everything. So I have to let some stuff get undone. I have to choose that, okay, these are the most important 4 things. If I can't do them, then I can't do these things, because anytime I spend doing these things means I'm not getting the most important stuff done. And so prioritizing is so important. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is very, very difficult to choose to not do things. It's especially difficult with ADHD because there's so many things we want to do. I have shelves of stuff and books that I've never read, things that I've started and haven't completed, and it's okay to not finish things so that I can spend that time on doing the things I want to do.
Well, also, I feel like you had sounded like you've got some small children and there's demands, right? Kids got to eat breakfast,
Yeah.
lunch, and dinner. They need to be bathed and go to school and those things. And if those things are always priority 1, then you got to wedge the other stuff in around them.
Yeah.
And knowing exactly what you're wedging, and you could decide, I'm going to do this thing. And then as you start to learn more, okay, my estimation about how much time or energy was wrong, maybe that's how we have metacognition. All right, now that I know more about this, is this really the way I want to use my time?
Yeah. And then using that knowledge to also be like, hey, how am I going to schedule myself so that I'm doing these important things when I have the energy to do it, and that I'm going to actually get them done? Because it's very easy to be like, oh, I'll get to it. But it's like, no, I got to schedule this. If I want to get this, if I can't work on this other stuff until I do this, then I got to get this stuff done in the beginning of the month or the beginning of the day, whatever the case is. And also to that point, do it early, because the longer you put it up, the more other stuff is going to get added to your plate. It is amazing when I do something in the morning, or inevitably, if I have put something off in the morning to do in the afternoon, I will have something else come up that afternoon that is more important that I do that. It's like, oh, well, now I have a child that's throwing up. I can no longer do writing. Should have done that when I had the chance.
Well, hindsight's always 2020, and that is the thing that you're saying, is things can change. We think we might know the landscape about how much time or energy we have, and there can be an emergency. There can be the things change, right? You're on the road, everything looks like it's going great. Then there's an accident up ahead of you, and now you're not on time anymore. Totally outside your control.
Yeah. And the point for doing it early is, as your day goes on, you have more and more chances for something else to come into your day. Every hour, there's a new chance for someone to send you an email with a fire that you have to put out. So do it. I try to ease myself into doing my work in the morning, but still do my most important work, in the morning, because then I can make sure it gets done before something else comes up.
And I see Rick put in the chat, leaving things to the last minute is risky, right? We think, all right, I've done this order of operations, buying the movie tickets on the phone before. All of a sudden you lose connectivity. There can be things that we leave to the last minute thinking we understand how much time it takes, and then something happens and it takes longer than that. And if we had just not made it so it was the last possible second, we'd have more opportunity to succeed.
Yeah. And we also have this issue of time blindness, where we don't realize how much time things are going to take. One of the ways I see it is, I have so much trouble seeing the whole of a task, where I split up tasks into being the setup, the doing of the task, and the cleanup. And often my brain is like, it's the doing. That is the only time that counts. But, like for lunch, if I only give myself 15 minutes and that's the amount of time I have that would take me to normally eat my lunch, well, then that does not account for any of the time to prepare the food I want to eat or any of the time to deal with the dishes that I make. So I have to factor into those two parts. Or another place where I have the invisible time issue is when I want to drive somewhere and I have to park. Go to the doctor's office, be like, okay, I have an appointment in 45 minutes. It takes 45 minutes to drive there. That's all I need. And it's like, no, it's going to take me some amount of time to park, even though they have a great parking structure there. It's going to take me some amount of time to park, some time to walk up into the building. Like that's all time that needs to be accounted for because it exists.
I mean, that's just the best metaphor. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles, so I mean, it just couldn't be more true. Yeah, you think you're going to get there at exactly the time you need to be there. There has to be some cushion time, and if you know you can't stand to be bored, then you've got a game on your phone and you can be in the waiting room, right? I've heard many an ADDer show up early and go, "Oh, look, there's a coffee shop across the street." Yeah. Oh, it's the same everywhere. Yeah, you're right. There is traffic everywhere. Now. 5 minutes early is on time. That's what I tell myself every day. Well, that's a yay, right?
Well, I mean, like signing into this Zoom, I was like, okay, I normally have my Zoom meetings scheduled in on my calendar. Didn't for this one for some reason because so I was like, oh, I'm going to sign into my email. And it was like, Google is timing out. That's not good. How am I going to get my Zoom room? And it was like, okay, let's figure this out. It was just, Chrome doesn't want to work with Google, my Gmail. That's a weird one not to have be incompatible. So I got to figure that out.
There are so many things that when we're at the last minute that jump up and bite us. So yeah. As is my practice, I love to do a thing where our guest shows how they do a thing, shows their work, so to speak. And we had talked about getting your head in the game. And we had two different things we could say about it. One was the podcast or the writing. So how do you get your head in the game for either of those things? And what does that mean, getting your head in the game?
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll start off with getting your head in the game. It's just getting your trying to think of something that's not another metaphor, because it's like getting amped. I'm like, that doesn't help. Getting your head in the game is being present and being ready to tackle whatever's going to happen, being ready to have the conversation, being ready to in sports, like I'm ready to make the catch or whatever I need to do. And so it's being ready, being there. And that means that we have to have a way to get ready. And one of the ways that I learned to do this from my time doing high school musicals was having a phrase to say to myself when it was time to start. And for me, it's showtime, which is something I did before going into this. I listened to my music, I did some breathing, and I went showtime, jumped on Zoom. And it's a way to be like, okay, hey, my brain is going to make this transition into doing what I need to do now. I'm giving myself a cue to change my state, to be present and be there, be ready.
I love it, because showtime, I mean, you only have to have been in your high school musical, right? Where you go, showtime, oh my God, everything else has to get put away because showtime. Yeah, it really communicates to me.